In my current research, I'm interested in the sequence of events that happens between the time an organization implements a compensation system and when we observe employees' outcomes in terms of their attitudes or behaviors. And specifically what I'm interested in is how people seek or acquire knowledge about the pay system and how they vary in that. Some people are very curious, some people not so much. And then also once they have that knowledge, how different people react to the pay system differently. I got interested in the topic because while there's a lot of compensation research out there, the way we typically study it is to look at objective compensation systems. So we'll say, well, we'll put in place a pay-for-performance system, and then we'll look at employee reactions, typically on average. So we'll say across the workplace, this pay-for-performance system motivates better performance, but we're looking at averages. And the limits of that research are that it doesn't take into account the fact that people may not perceive the pay system the way it's intended. They may not understand really how it works. Or like a lot of people, they may not even care to go look. You know, they're just not into their pay. Hard to believe, but sometimes people just really aren't that. They have other things on their minds. The other assumption that's made there is that everyone reacts the same way. So, okay, even if they know the same thing, that they'll react the same way, and we know that they don't. And so, but we don't study that as sort of a middle path. And you might say, well, why is that important? Well, it's important because let's say that you put in place a pay-for-performance system. Some people are really motivated by it, which is what you meant. Some people are, so motivated by it. And then there may be actually people that are demotivated by it and might really dislike it, not perform well, maybe even leave because they dislike it. And that's important because some of those people may be people you want to keep. So it may be that they're high performers otherwise, normally, or that they have some really valuable skills that you don't want to lose in the organization. It may also be that some pay systems systematically are unattractive to particular whole groups of people. So maybe women are really dislike a particular pay system or aren't as motivated by it as you would think. And so kind of knowing how individuals are going to react differently could be useful in terms of picking a system up front and anticipating how people are going to react to it. Right now, what we know is a lot of anecdotal evidence. And so you hear from news reports, occasionally you'll see a survey here or there, that organizations vary a lot. Some organizations actually publish a lot of pay information, so you could go look up a person by name and see what their salary is. Other organizations would never do that. They don't publish any pay information. Some organizations publish a lot of information about how pay is determined. So yes, we have pay for performance, but this is how you can make more money, and this is the formula or the process for making different amounts of pay. Some organizations don't do that. Others have very strict policies about employees talking amongst themselves about pay. So some organizations strictly prohibit it, and they'll say you can be fired for doing it. Other organizations don't have those kinds of policies in place or try to enforce those sorts of things. And so right now what I'm working on actually is a global study to try to understand what organizations are doing across different countries, and also even within countries, how they vary based on, for instance, their industry or the types of pay programs that they offer, or do some types of pay systems tend to make organizations more open or less open. One issue that's why this is sort of another important thing that's gaining some traction in terms of organizations caring about it is that it relates to the pay gap. So when we talk about the gender pay gap, where women typically make less than men in most countries, and there's a lot of movement right now toward trying to figure out how to fix that. And one solution potentially that's been proposed is for organizations to offer more pay information so that people can be aware. A lot of times women may not know they make less than men, for example, so they can't go ask about it and try to rectify a problem if there's a problem. And so there's some discussion about pay transparency being something positive toward resolving that issue. And so I think in the future you're going to see maybe more organizations doing that in an effort to try to kind of deal with the pay gap issue. I think another thing that you may see going forward in the future is that right now we see a lot of, I would say, generational differences in how much people talk about things that used to be private or taboo information. For instance, we could think of, years ago, no one talked about their pay, or very rarely. That was just something you didn't ask anyone, you didn't talk about. And now, we do see more of a trend of people talking on social media about all kinds of things, including compensation. And so I think what you'll probably also see going forward is organizations moving away from prohibiting those conversations amongst employees, because I really think it's getting to the point where you can't really enforce that anyway. And so instead of having policies about you're going to get fired if you talk to your coworkers about your pay, you may see more of a shift toward making sure they at least have accurate information if they're going to have these conversations, so they're not getting upset about something that isn't actually even correct. Some major questions that remain are, so what do organizations do about all this, right? So I think what we expect to find and what we're starting to find is that indeed people do vary in their interest in seeking out pay information. Some people, you could put the information up there on the website super detailed and they'll never even go look, right? And so we do know that varies. And we also know there's these different reactions to pay information. But what do organizations do about that? What's the right approach? There's some different things they could do. So you might say, well, we have a pay for performance system. Most of our employees like this, but there's a segment that don't. Should we put another kind of system in place to make sure those people are motivated? So kind of layering on top of, one system on top of another so that you get everyone happy with something. Another approach might be to try to customize or tailor pay systems to individuals, which is kind of tricky to do. It's more feasible to do now with technology. You actually theoretically could do it. You just might run into issues with fairness. But you do see this in certain populations like executives. So an executive, they are not all paid exactly the same, and you might tailor a package to make one executive fit their preferences or fit their what motivates them better than someone else. So that's one approach. Another approach might be just say, tough. This is our pay system. Some people aren't going to like it, and if they don't like it, they can leave, and we'll hire some more people that like our pay system, right? So we call that sorting. That's actually sort of what economics would predict, is that over time you wait long enough, and that's kind of what will happen. Again, though, you're not always guaranteed that the people you lose would be people you would have wanted to lose. So, and it also does take some time, so there's some risk to that. So that's one research question, is what's the best way to resolve once you know these varied responses exist. A second interesting question is what kinds of trigger events cause employees to become more curious and start seeking pay information. So a lot of times one you could imagine might be when the raises come out and people, they know everyone got their raise information, so people start asking questions or looking around. That's one that kind of you would expect. But there may be other things. So it may be my best friend got a raise at work, at his job at another place, and it makes me now curious to think about, am I underpaid? And so those kinds of things are more individual level. And so also thinking about once that trigger event happens and I start seeking information, and let's say I learn I'm underpaid, I'm probably going to have a negative reaction. I'm probably going to be upset. I may try to do something about it. But how long does it last? Is it a sort of a short-term event, and then I settle back in and kind of forget about it? I don't think we have pay on the brain all the time, although economists kind of assume that that's all we think about all the time. I think we have other things going on, but I do think it's more salient sometimes than others and might have important effects at certain times after people learn about it. I think the big takeaway is that in HR, from an organizational standpoint, we often spend a lot of time putting these pay systems in place with the goal that they're going to do, people are going to know about them, they're going to have this effect on increasing motivation and performance. And I think forgetting that there are these varied reactions. We assume, you put the information out there and people are going to automatically know. And they don't necessarily take it in just because you put it out there. There's a lot more that organizations probably can do to ensure that people have sort of take an active role in learning the knowledge, pay knowledge that it's accurate and that sort of thing, so that you get the response that you hope from the standpoint that they at least know how the system works. Now, again, you may not necessarily change how they react, so there'll be some people that'll be more responsive to it than others. But I think for organizations to be aware of that, expect it, anticipate it, and then think about how you're going to deal with it. People that are not wild about this pay system, having a strategy for dealing with that rather than just learning, oh my gosh, this employee left because they didn't like this system and we had no idea, that was going to be an issue or that sort of thing. So I think being able to anticipate what can happen so that you can have some strategies in place for trying to create a more uniform response, so you're not surprised by what happens.